Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump has responded to concerns about his mental health by tweeting this lunchtime that mental stability is one of his greatest assets and that he is what he says, a very stable genius. The author of an explosive new book based on accounts of many people who work with the US president has said that 100% of the people around him questioned his fitness for office. Well, in a series of tweets sent in just the last few hours, Mr. Trump has said, actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. Crooked Hillary Clinton also played these cards very hard and, as everyone knows, went down in flames. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to President of the United States, in brackets, on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. Well, Mr. Trump also called the account of his presidency published yesterday boring and untruthful. Sky's Cordelia Lynch has more.
In Washington, it seems there is an insatiable appetite for Michael Wolff's incendiary take on Donald Trump and the White House. Fire and Fury hit the shelves at midnight in some shops, but was sold out in minutes. And the author says he stands by every word of his damning portrait of a paranoid, unbalanced president. Mr. Trump denies speaking to him for the book and says it is full of lies.
I will tell you the one description that everyone gave, everyone has in common. They all say he is like a child. They say he's a moron, an idiot. Actually, there's a competition to sort of get to the bottom line here of who this man is. Let's remember, this man does not read, does not listen.
From ABC News, I'm Scott Goldberg. The new book that claims to expose the inner workings of the Trump White House went on sale this morning and already is #1 on the Amazon bestseller list.
It is just exploding everywhere. As the book now came out today officially, the Michael Wolff book on President Trump.
Outside the D.C. bubble, a very different tone.
They do this to every Republican president. Remember Ronnie Reagan?
Yeah.
It's all about is dislodge Trump by any means possible.
The sound of doubt and indignation from callers at WBAL radio station in Baltimore.
And the narrative has changed.
Talk show host Andrew Langer believes there is a silent coup afoot in the White House, but he doesn't think the recent wild claims have changed public opinion.
If you are a Trump hater, then this book just confirms everything you've already thought about Donald Trump. If you're a Trump supporter or a Trump loyalist, this is just more evidence that folks are out to get the president.
Donald Trump didn't want these exposing pages published, but his threat of legal action has arguably only helped boost sales. I'm told this is one of the last copies of the hotly debated book available here in Baltimore. But despite the demand, the accuracy and ethics of the journalism in it have been increasingly questioned. And the author has acknowledged that trying to thread together often conflicting accounts is an imperfect exercise.
Should Steve Bannon be fired? Should Steve Bannon be fired, sir?
Donald Trump tried to shift the conversation as he left for Camp David. Like many of his supporters, it's progress, not palace intrigue, he wants to focus on. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Baltimore.
Well, I'm joined now by Albert Scardino. He's a former media advisor to Bill Clinton. Good afternoon, Albert. Thank you for joining us. Do you think, presumably you have seen these tweets from Donald Trump declaring himself a very stable genius. Is there a case that the president doth protest his mental stability a little too much?
Well, I think he's been protesting everything too much since he first got started. He's the only one who's ever been fit for office. he had his doctor during the campaign dictate a letter saying that he was the healthiest person ever to run for president. And then he sent his driver by to pick the letter up, and that was the closest we got to a medical assessment of his fitness for office before he was elected. So I don't think we can put very much credence in Donald Trump's diagnoses of his own condition, and he won't submit to anybody else having a diagnosis. So we're stuck with circumstantial observation.
As a former media advisor, do you stand aghast at some of the sort of childish vernacular, his use of superlative, usually about himself, or is there a case that it's actually quite effective?
I stand in awe of his ability to hog the camera and to focus attention on himself. It is a narcissism that is honed in childhood and has been getting sharper and sharper ever since he became a TV star. There's no limit to his need for attention and for depriving anyone else of attention, which is part of, I think, he does have some areas of genius, and one of them is an area in media manipulation, his ability to send these tweets out in the early hours of the morning in order to capture the top of the story for times when the news is slow otherwise. I think it's remarkable. He's doing a magnificent job of managing the media to say what he wants it to say.
Have you read the book that everybody's talking about, Michael Wolff's book?
I've read Michael Wolff for a long time, ever since I was a reporter in New York, but I haven't gotten on the advanced distribution list, and although it has gone on sale as of yesterday, according to his publisher, I haven't yet managed to find a bookstore that has it. You've presumably read some of the excerpts from the book, though. I mean, do you think any of this is going to stick? Is it problematic for President Trump, or is it really just accounts from people who've got axes to grind? I think he has this is not a question of who has axes to grind. I think in any political situation, you have people who are close to the center of power who like to pass on information that is usually has some kernel of truth in it. Because it makes them sound and seem more important. So I have no doubt that Michael Wolff did 200 interviews, and I don't have no doubt that he managed to interview an awful lot of people who said the things that he quoted them as saying. It's remarkable that what they have said is so consistent. It's not all this talk we hear of White House infighting, even the ones who were opposed to each other from the very early days, they're saying the same thing about their boss.
He's got a health check, hasn't he, coming up? What do you think we can expect to learn from that?
Well, I think I think we can learn only that he's overweight. He borders on the clinical definition of obesity. He has high cholesterol levels. He takes statins for that. We know that from what little medical information he released about himself back during the campaign. He is exhibiting all of the signs of learning disabilities and dyslexia. He doesn't read very much, and he gets most of his information audibly. So that's a classic sign of dyslexia from people who get their information mostly from listening. And I think that makes him vulnerable to the last voices that he heard. And usually the last voices he heard are either the Fox television broadcast that he listens to early in the morning, or himself. He listens to himself all the time. He certainly doesn't pay much attention to very many of the people around him because he keeps firing them.
The book was claiming that his attention span not only is very short, but is also getting noticeably shorter. Is that a concern while he's in office?
I think there is a lot we don't know about neuroscience. And within neuroscience, there's an awful lot we don't know about how Donald Trump's brain is functioning. There are a lot of people who are very, very qualified medically who are concerned about that he has some sort of degenerative condition, that may be Alzheimer's, it may be another form of neurological disorder. He certainly has psychiatric patterns that very many well-qualified psychiatrists in the U.S. have written about and talked about as being making him on the edge of stability. And he certainly has very high levels of intelligence in certain areas. He certainly has a very good sense of spatial intelligence. That's typical of people in the real estate industry who are successful. But he has also very, very average levels of other kinds of intelligence and very poor ability to acquire information from multiple sources and to weigh the different merits of that information. And that's what makes everything so worrisome.
Albert Scardino, thank you very much. Whatever he is or isn't, we know he's not modest, don't we?
Thank you very much for asking me.
Joining us now from New York is John Le Boutier, a political columnist and former Republican Congressman. John, thanks a lot for joining us. So often when we read...
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. It's evening here, actually, in the UK, but let's get on with it. When we often read these tweets that the president writes, it often seems like a gut reaction to something that he's heard or read. I just wanted to know what your gut reaction was to those 3 tweets he sent out this morning.
It's always the same. It's, oh, my God, I can't believe any president is writing, saying, or tweeting what he's just said. And the way he did the one this morning about, like, I'm like smart, very smart. That's the way a 12-year-old Valley girl writes or speaks. The like, he's a 71-year-old man. That one, and to proclaim himself a stable genius. Let's take a look at the big picture. We've never had any president of the United States ever talk about his mental stability. He's no president other than Nixon in the last few months of his presidency when he was going down the drain in Watergate, where it was talked about that maybe he's going to flip out and start a nuclear war, but he was never asked about it. He never commented on it. This is unbelievable, you know. All this week kicked off by the book, but the dirty little secret is all the Republican congressmen and senators who deal with Trump, they've seen this too. They know he's not right in the head, but they're afraid to say it, and that's why none of them are defending him or commenting on the book.
Listen, let's look at these tweets and let's talk about the language. I mean, he does have a point, don't you think? I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to president of the United States on my first try. Do you think perhaps if he just used different language, it would have been received better across the board?
No. I think that it's the Wolf book that has set this off, that there are so many incidents in the book from people around Trump saying on the record and off the record that they think he's a child and not up to the job. And we already had other stories that had come out during the past year. Rex Tillerson calling him an effing moron. McMaster, the national security advisor, telling the CEO of Oracle over dinner he's a idiot and a dope. Senator Bob Corker last fall saying they need adult daycare at the White House. I mean, there have been enough little hints that this is going on.
Where do you go from here, John? If Michael Wolff has said that 100% of the people who work with the U.S. president question his fitness for office, where do we go? Right. Where do the U.S. people go from here?
First, where we go is this coming week, he's going to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the annual checkup that presidents have. On Wednesday or Thursday of this past week at the White House press briefing, we had the unbelievable spectacle of a reporter asking the White House press secretary about that upcoming medical checkup and asked her, will the president be having a mental acuity test when he goes to Bethesda? And all Sarah Sanders said was, well, we'll give you a readout when it's all done. I mean, never has a White House press secretary been asked if there's going to be a mental acuity test. I think this thing's going to grow bigger in the immediate future. Where it's headed, ultimately, I don't know. Trump hates it when he's criticized in general, but he really hates it when his brains, when his stability, or when people talk about him being senile, he goes crazy. So I look for more odd reaction from him in the days to come.
Well, we have actually had reaction today. He's been at Camp David with leaders of the Republican Party. Did you watch that press conference?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so they all came out, and Donald Trump didn't address it initially. He said nothing. Then we had Mitch McConnell come up, we had Paul Ryan come up. They were all talking about what the Republican Party, what the administration has done this year. And everyone was watching that press conference. Do you think this is Donald Trump spinning his PR magic?
Oh, no question. And on policy, we had this huge announcement that there will be no DACA deal for the 700,000 kids that are here. There will be no deal, according to Trump, unless the Democrats relent and fund the wall. So that's normal presidential trading, negotiating political business. But then when he addresses the mental stability issue, that's where this thing veers off into uncharted territory.
When you're looking at someone's mental stability, if you are not a medical professional, who are you to be questioning someone's mental stability?
Well, first of all, as an American citizen, the president works for me, works for all of us, and we have every right to question him about anything we want to question him about. And I think more and more people observe, learn about his behavior. They have every right to question it. I mean, hey, what's good for goose is good for the gander. During the campaign, at every stop for months, Trump slammed Hillary Clinton for being ill with no evidence of it, for being neurologically impaired with no evidence of it. His number one acolyte on Fox News, which is state-run propaganda TV now, by the way. And I'm a Republican who used to work there saying this, and it's an embarrassment. It's not even a news network anymore. It's state TV. And they used to run a clip, a manufactured clip of Hillary Clinton stumbling on the final step climbing into an airplane. And they ran that over and over and over again to say that she wasn't up to being president.
So this meeting at Camp David with the Republican leaders will undoubtedly be overshadowed by this Wolf book and the revelations in that. But the midterms coming up, how do you think the Republicans are going to fare in that? And do you think they're going to be discussing the midterms at this retreat?
Well, certainly they were. The purpose of the retreat yesterday, last night, and today was to come up with their legislative agenda for this year. And they just can't, first thing they have to do is fund the government. 2 weeks from yesterday, they don't have the votes yet to get the budget passed. And then they'll move on to talk about infrastructure, DACA, which is this thing about the children. And the midterm elections scare the Republicans to death. They're very worried about what's coming, that they feel there's a anti-Trump, anti-Republican wave building. And the evidence of that was Alabama 3 weeks ago, that special election, solid Republican state. And on election night, when the exit polling of the people who voted that day was revealed, in Alabama, Trump had 48% approval, 48% disapproval in a state that a year ago he won 62% of the vote in. That's terrible. That shows huge erosion even among his own voters.
Okay, John, thank you so much for talking to us. We'll be watching out for those midterm elections and monitoring Twitter.
All right. Thanks for having me. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Even by Donald Trump standards, his latest tweets appear extraordinary. Today, he rejected suggestions swirling around Washington that he is unfit to be the American president or to be in the White House. He tweeted that he was mentally well and added that he was a genius and a very stable genius at that. As our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports, this latest presidential Twitter firestorm was fueled by the inflammatory new book about the first year of his presidency.
Inside the presidential retreat at Camp David, Donald Trump is spending the weekend meeting Republican congressional leaders. It follows a tumultuous week in Washington dominated by the fallout from this new book. The claims that the president is widely regarded even by his own staff as having the focus and temperament of a child. In response to that, the president has written this morning another series of bizarre tweets. Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. And Trump continued, I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to President of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. Of course, claiming to be a stable genius may only fuel the debate about the president's emotional and mental health. But yesterday, his Secretary of State came to his defense.
I have no reason to question his mental fitness.
But Michael Wolff, the author of the new book, says the president can rarely keep his concentration.
This man does not read, does not listen. So he's like a pinball, just shooting off the side.
But this is a surreal start to 2018, a year that will see further extraordinary demands on the president, from the crisis in North Korea to Iran, and to the pressures bearing down on him from the investigation into possible pre-election collusion with Russia. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
Donald Trump has dismissed claims made in a new book that he is mentally unfit for office. He's told a news conference that his success in business, television and politics is proof of his capabilities. And he's dismissed the book's author, Michael Wolff, who was given long-term access to the White House, as a fraud. From Washington, David Willis.
Boarding a flight to Camp David for meetings with senior Republican leaders, the image Donald Trump was seeking to project was one of order, professionalism and control. Instead, he finds himself battling claims contained in a book, claims which question his mental fitness.
I went to the best colleges, or college. I went to I had a situation where I was a very excellent student, came out, made billions and billions of dollars, became one of the top business people, went to television, and for 10 years was a tremendous success, as you probably have heard.
Perhaps the most damaging allegation shared, claims the author Michael Wolff, by all the president's senior advisers, is that the leader of the free world lacks curiosity, doesn't read, doesn't listen, is like a child.
They all came to the conclusion, gradually at first and then faster and faster, that something was unbelievably amiss here, that this was more peculiar than they ever imagined it could be.
Fire and Fury also quotes Donald Trump's former senior aide Steve Bannon, the man credited with getting Trump elected, as describing a meeting between a Russian lawyer and Mr. Trump's son, Donald Jr., as treasonous. Other revelations paint a picture of a chaotic White House at the mercy of a petulant, easily distracted commander-in-chief. Claims denied by a leading member of the administration.
I've never questioned his mental fitness. I have no reason to question his mental fitness. We have different management styles. How I make decisions, how I process information, I have to learn how he takes information in, processes it, and makes decisions.
Having achieved a major success just before Christmas with the passage of tax reform legislation, senior Republicans had hoped that the new year would mark a new start for the Trump administration. But instead of moving forward on such key issues as immigration reform, the focus, it seems, is yet again on the president himself, his personality, and his mental competence. David Willis, BBC News, Washington.
I'm like really smart and a very stable genius, not playground banter, but Oval Office reassurance, part of President Trump's early morning barrage of tweets. Online artillery aimed at reporters and politicians questioning his mental fitness to hold office, the highest office. This followed claims in Michael Wolff's explosive new book that Trump behaved like an impulsive child, driven by the constant need for instant gratification and ridiculed even by his inner circle. Heading for the supposedly blissful isolation of Camp David, an opportunity to reflect on his first year in office, to talk strategy for the next year and the all-important congressional elections. But most importantly, perhaps, a chance to get away from the fire and fury unleashed by Fire and Fury, Michael Wolff's book.
We have a lot of things to work on, a lot of things to accomplish. The stock market is up very, very big today.
But a thriving stock market may well be just a comfort blanket for Mr. Trump to cling to. His administration is drowning in claims of a dysfunctional White House. At its center, a mentally unfit president, more needy child than commander-in-chief. But predictably, perhaps, no isolation in the world could stop the president from going full Twitter. Within the space of a few minutes this morning, he'd attacked the Democrats, Hillary Clinton and the mainstream media, and offered a defense of his mental capacities, more playground than Oval Office. Actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. And today, after a first day of Camp David talks, the president brought even more fury to Mr. Wolf.
I consider it a work of fiction, and I think it's a disgrace that somebody's able to have something, do something like that. The libel laws are very weak in this country. If they were strong, it would be very helpful. You wouldn't have things like that happen where you can say whatever comes to your head. But just so you know, I never interviewed with him in the White House at all. He was never in the Oval Office. We didn't have an interview.
All points which Michael Wolff has claimed are not true. Trump fell just short, however, of calling himself a genius again, but did claim credit for progress on the Korean Peninsula.
If I weren't involved, they wouldn't be talking about Olympics right now. They'd be doing no talking, or they would be much more serious. He knows I'm not messing around. I'm not messing around. Not even a little bit. Not even 1%. He understands that. If something can happen and something can come out of those talks, that would be a great thing for all of humanity.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Today, the president, wearing the tie, was supposed to come across as the designated adult, surrounded by his loyal staff. The book, quoting some of the very same people in this posse, has it exactly the other way around. Well, joining me now is Jan Halper-Hayes, former Vice President of Republicans Overseas. Thanks for coming to the studio, Jan. I mean, as I pointed out in my piece, there are all these numbers that are very positive. The stock market is up. Unemployment is at, what, 4.2%. Americans are finally feeling positive about the recovery, which they hadn't done for almost a decade. So why does he bother picking this fight?
Well, I think we can explore that, but at the same time, I found it very interesting that he said he has great mental stability. He did not say emotional stability, he said mental stability.
Because his mental stability had been questioned in the book by some of his closest advisors.
I think it was more, yeah, some, but more his emotional stability than necessarily his mental, because he thinks through the policies and he's seen the problems. Absolutely. Look, you can go back to 1999. He was on Meet the Press with Tim Russert, and he was outlining the North Korean problems then. I mean... But
that was 1999. I mean, there are people who argue, including in the White House, that his mental capacities have become diminished ever since taking the Oval Office. You don't want it that way around, do you?
No, I don't. I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way at all.
OK, but you cannot deny that Michael Wolff has come up with a whole host of sources. I mean, has taped them. He's had these conversations in the Oval Office. Yeah. I mean, outside the Oval Office, on the sofa in the West Wing. I mean, this stuff is on tape. If the president keeps denying it, at some stage, the audio will be heard.
Well, it's on tape, and it's one or two, maybe three people's opinions about things, judgment, criticism. But when they say he doesn't deal with detail or he doesn't read things, let's just think about, in any organization, you need a team of people to do things. And so, really, we've got to think about that.
But hang on a minute, Jan. If the president, the CEO of Esso or of EasyJet said, I'm, like, really smart and I'm a genius and a very stable one, now, would you be buying stock in that company?
Well,
or would you head for
I'll
the
tell
hills?
you, if the numbers were doing well, if the sales were doing well, if the employees were happy, if the customers were happy, you bet I would. Look, I consulted with Bob Crandall of American Airlines. They called him Darth Vader. Stephen Jobs, I consulted with him. These guys act like babies because they're so used to having
But they're not running
people...
the most powerful country in the world. They're not the commander-in-chief of a nuclear arsenal. That's the difference.
So that's what worries you? Well, actually, I think that Trump is the greatest gift that could have happened to Kim Jong-un because the North Koreans need to make Americans the bad guy, and this gives him something that puts him in greater esteem with his people.
When you, as an American, as someone who represents or represented Republicans overseas, when you hear the president speak like this, tweet like this, use that language, does it make you proud?
You know, I get asked proud, ashamed.
Well, what is it?
I'm not bothered by it. I think that's the easiest thing. I am not bothered by it because I know that when he tweets, he does it to change the course of the conversation, to get certain points across, to be deceptive.
Is it that thought through?
Oh, yes.
Or is it just from the gut?
Oh, no, no, no. It is absolutely...
There's method in the madness.
Oh, there is absolute method in the madness. Absolute. But the thing is that, look, I have friends that totally support him, but they won't listen to him on TV because they don't like listening to him, but they absolutely believe what he's doing.
In midterm elections this year, that's going to be a problem for him, isn't it, potentially?
I don't know, because the Democrats are in very, very bad shape, and the Democratic voters are terribly unhappy. It's the independents that we really need to look at.
We will. John Halper-Hayes, thanks very much indeed. If things weren't surreal enough in the Trump White House, there are now reports that the president's team has requested a special screening of Steven Spielberg's new film, The Post.
The most highly classified documents of the war.
It is the focus of a new film called The Post, President Nixon's 1971 fight with the media to prevent the publication of the Pentagon Papers, leading to the now famous case, the New York Times Company versus the United States.
What will happen if we don't publish more? We will lose. The country will lose.
The film goes behind the scenes at the Washington Post as they joined the Times in a fight for the right to publish the top-secret documents revealing the truth about the war in Vietnam. The man behind those leaked documents was a strategic analyst named Daniel Ellsberg. He was charged under the Espionage Act and could have faced more than 100 years in prison, but the charges were later dropped.
Any regret? When did you make a decision? Certainly, Matt, I'm very pleased at the way the newspapers have acted.
What is not as commonly known is he also took with him top-secret documents related to America's nuclear program in the 1960s. Now, a book he drafted nearly 40 years ago based on those documents and the work he did on the program has been published. But in the age of President Trump threatening nuclear war, is the issue now more urgent than ever before? I asked Daniel Ellsberg just that.
He's not the first president to be making nuclear threats. That has actually happened, as I describe in my book, several dozen times. Presidents have used our nuclear weapons. The way you use a gun when you point it at someone's head in a confrontation, whether or not you pull the trigger. In fact, if you get your way without pulling the trigger, that's the best use. And we've often done that. But this is the first time in half a century, the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, in which I participated, in which a president has made threats of imminent attack against the nuclear weapons state. North Vietnam did not have nuclear weapons. Korea, when Truman first threatened them. Now we're threatening a country that does have them. And even if it doesn't cause nuclear winter and starve most of the people on Earth, as a war with Russia would do, it will cause more violence in a day or a week than the human species has ever seen in its history.
You had your famous run-in with Richard Nixon, President Nixon. You, of course, played your part in his downfall. And I think at one stage he tried to poison your soup with LSD. So you tried various shenanigans.
Well, LSD is not poison, of course, but his idea was that I would humiliate myself in front of supporters if they did that. But the approval from the White House didn't come in time for the waiters to carry that out.
So if you were to compare Nixon and Trump, do you see any similarities?
Very great similarities. They're both rather explicitly carrying out a madman strategy, the threat of being mad enough to carry out an insanely reckless act. However, Nixon was doing it secretly. The difference is that Trump, of course, is doing it openly, and there is another difference. A lot of people suspect that this president may be mad, and that's worrisome. The same is true of Kim Jong-un, who's using his weapons in a similar way. So we have two people playing nuclear chicken, as Bertrand Russell put it, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was right then, and he's right now. It is a mad policy to be carrying out a madman strategy with nuclear weapons.
You were the most famous whistleblower of your era, and you almost went to jail for it. Ed Snowden is the most famous whistleblower of this era, and the two of you are friends. Now, when I interviewed Donald Trump a few years ago and asked him about Ed Snowden, he said that he thought Ed Snowden should be executed for treason. I wonder what Donald Trump would make of you.
Oh, he would say the same without any question. Though actually in this country, he would discover, Donald Trump is not an authority on the U.S. Constitution, and he would discover that we had defined in our founders, in the Constitution, a very narrow definition of treason. So Trump would want to do that, but actually he'd have a problem charging me with that. I was facing 12 felony counts with the Pentagon Papers for a possible sentence of 115 years. They did not include either perjury or treason.
I mean, you're a wise man. You've dealt with nuclear war and its risks and its planning perhaps more than anyone else on the planet. And this question may be impossible to answer, but on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely is it that we might see some sort of nuclear war somewhere in the next 10 years?
If our present course continues, building up on both the U.S. and Russia, by the way, rebuilding the entire doomsday machine, with Britain rebuilding its whole Trident program, then I would say if we're looking at 100 years, 200 years, it's very hard to believe, for me to believe, that we get away with it. I think we're on the Titanic right now, humanity, and we're sailing into iceberg waters as the Titanic did, full speed ahead on a dark night. It didn't have to go down, and we don't have to go down, but it did need to change course, as every other ship in that vicinity did that night on the same warnings. They stopped dead in the water, or went ahead very slowly, or changed course. The Titanic had an owner that wanted to set a speed record for its maiden voyage. It hadn't even advertised that. And so the ship couldn't go south, couldn't stop, had to go ahead. We're acting like that now, but we don't have to.
Cheerful thought there from Daniel Ellsberg.